All right, so this is Pass the Hash 2, which may lead you to believe that this is a continuation of the Pass the Hash talk yesterday. Anybody go to that talk? Bravest guys in the room, the Microsoft presenters that are here. This is not a continuation of that talk. This is a continuation of our talk last year. I'm Chris, this is Skip. We both co-presented at Black Hat last year. Skip wrote the Pass the Hash suite. That's our info. So this story so far, last year we demonstrated how to use WCE to pass the hash using Windows tools. So you can pass the hash and fire up PowerShell. You can use credentials within Windows itself by adding a single binary. More importantly, we released the Pass the Hash suite, which is partially in Kali and fully in Backtrack. Basically, that took an old patch of Samba to allow it to pass the hash, and then we ported that so that you could pass the hash to Exchange, SQL, pass the hash with Firefox. Has anyone used those tools? A couple people. Passing the hash with Firefox as a pen tester has been amazingly useful. And also, we were able to pass the hash using WMI, so we can get command execution without using things like psexec. So that so far is where we're at. So now that you're caught up, we can continue on. But before we start, who's an admin, like a Windows admin here? Wow. Couple? All right, who's a pen tester? Quite a few pen testers. For a defensive talk?
Network defenders?
Network, like defenders, IDS, analysts. Who's interested in trying to protect against or detect or mitigate against pass the hash today? Awesome. That's what we were hoping for. All right, Skip.
So one of the things that we really wanted to do was there's a lot of talk and hype and marketing, et cetera, that's out there about pass the hash. So we wanted to address some of the common misconceptions that are out there. We also wanted to provide you guys with some practical things that you can use hopefully tomorrow or next week when you go back to work that will help you mitigate the credential attacks and pass the hash. And we also wanted to do it in less than 80 pages. Sorry, guys. So we're trying to educate people. That's really the biggest thing we want to do. Pass the hash sounds really, really sexy. I mean, everyone knows what pass the hash is, but it really isn't like the central problem. Windows has numerous issues with authentication. I'm sure everyone has heard of Mimikatz and Windows Credential Editor, Benjamin Delpy's tool. There's broken protocols that are still in use. Last year, Moxie's talk introduced a cloud service that will crack MSChap/NTLM version 1. Cast credentials, tokens, there's just a lot of stuff that's out there that can be used to gain access to a Windows box. Like I mentioned earlier, pass the hash is only a small subset of the problems that are there in Windows authentication. Obviously, if you can just read the actual username and password out of memory, that would be far easier than using pass the hash or anything else. Credentials are a user's main form of persistence on your network, and they're extremely portable. You can go from one machine to another machine if you actually have the username and password. So a lot of people in this day and age have been asking, why pass the hash when you can use the actual creds? For some reason, people think that you can actually fix pass the hash with a patch. Pass the hash is by design functionality that's built into the NTLM protocol. Why else do you think when the other service providers in LSAS save the username and password, the only thing that gets saved by the NTLM service provider are the hashes? If they needed the username and password, they would have saved the username and password. Instead, they saved the hashes. And another little side bit that I always like to hammer on, the LM password, if you're using a password on a Windows box that is less than 14 characters or less, in LSASS, the LM hash is always calculated currently. Now, the Microsoft guys talked about yesterday, new version of Windows Blue and Server 2012 R2. That functionality is finally getting removed, because, I mean, who uses LM anymore? But, and obviously it also makes it easier to crack the NTLM hash, because you can then use rainbow tables on the LM hash. You could then just take that word, do some case scrambling, and you'll get the NTLM without any problems. So this is something that was partially addressed yesterday, but it still had a big TBD next to it. Even if Microsoft figures out a way to completely neutralize pass the hash or any of the other attacks that are out there, there's no guarantee that it's going to be backported into the versions of Microsoft products that are being used in your environment today. So just as a quick informal survey, who here still has Vista on their network? I was getting there. Who still has XP on their network? All right. Who still... You know where we're going next, don't you? Who still has 2000 on their network? All right. You're going to make me ask it, aren't you? Who has Windows NT still on their network? You know what? We're just going to call you the winner and we'll be done with it.
95? 98.
Oh, man. 95. You make a grown man cry. Oh, wait, or start me up, wasn't it? Yeah. I'm sure that stuff's still out there. So anyway, another common topic is that Kerberos actually completely solves or completely eliminates the problems with pass the hash. And that is quite simply just not true. The NTLM hashes are actually used in the Kerberos process as the long-term secret keys between Kerberos principals and the domain controller. So if you compromise the domain controller, you still get the encryption key for everyone, for every Kerberos ticket, the long-term encryption key. The Kerb TGT hash, which is in the domain controller, is the master key for all Kerberos tickets. So per our white paper last year, once you have that, you can actually create your own arbitrary Kerberos tickets with whatever privileges for whatever user. All you need is a few SIDs and away you go, and you can literally just write your own ticket onto the network. So basically, between the two, loss of the hash can completely undermine Kerberos, and TGTs are fairly portable. They can be with WCE, and I think Mimikatz also has that functionality now. The TGTs can be exported from one computer, moved over to another, re-imported into LSASS, and even though they're time limited, they can more or less be continually renewed with, some caveats depending on what your settings are. And the Microsoft guys kind of going, eh. Yeah. So basically, there's still a lot of issues with Kerberos. And just as a quick aside, there was a ACM paper from, what was it, 91?
91 or 92.
91 or 92, that talked about problems in Kerberos 4, where they talked about things like compromise of the KDC could ultimately result in somebody being able to impersonate anybody on the network. They talked about how TGTs were relatively portable, and some other stuff that was specific to Kerberos 4 at the time, but a lot of these problems are still around today. And in our white paper, we actually link to the thing. It's just a fascinating read because literally you could just substitute Windows for Unix here and there, and the paper reads very cleanly. So the real issue here is single sign-on. Microsoft actually has a term for getting prompted, just based on the videos I've seen, for your password too many times, called credential fatigue. So there's actually a term for getting bugged to put in your password over and over again. So the idea is you ask for their password once, username, password, log in, and then you keep the nagging at a minimum. Windows also caches the credentials for any of the SSPs that are loaded by default. So, you know, you need them maybe, possibly, sometime, somewhere, maybe, kind of. So this is actually the title of our white paper. Please go read it. It's a lot more thorough and in-depth than our talk. And everyone that's read it so far is really liked it. So feel free to read through it. It's only 25 pages. We tried to keep it at a minimum. But let us know if you have any feedback. So obviously we have the ability to recover the plain text passwords from memory. You've got Digest MD5, you've got the TS package, and the Live SSP because, you know, your enterprise needs to authenticate to Xbox Live and Windows Live because that's really what I want. Even if nobody is logged in, there is at least one plain text password that is available on every domain, every computer in a Windows domain, and that is the computer account. It's stored in LSA secrets. You can recover its hash, or like I said, the unencrypted password itself is actually stored in the LSA secrets. Tools like Cache Dump can actually pull it out. And you can use it to do all sorts of interesting things on the domain, such as enumerate user groups, enumerate users, mount file shares, because how does the computer itself communicate with Active Directory? It uses its computer account. How does the computer update its GPOs? It uses its computer account. So it uses its computer account to access the domain controller. It uses it to do all these things. And as an attacker, you can use the computer account to do all sorts of information gathering. And it really doesn't look that weird in the logs. And once again, the LSA secrets, there might actually be more passwords you can use for saved passwords that are for service accounts and stuff like that. Then there's always the SAM database. The local 500 account is actually a very dangerous account. There is a separate UAC setting for the local 500 account that is disabled by default in most modern versions of Windows. However, the 500 account itself, if you install from disk the latest version of Windows, is disabled by default. When you sign in and create a new user, you actually create a new local user that is in the local admins group. And by default, both the guest and the local administrator account are disabled. However, a lot of places still use them. The only caveat to that is, on Server 2012, currently, by default, the 500 account is the one that gets created, and the UAC setting that's specifically for the 500 account is not enabled by default. The other problem with the local admin accounts are that they're typically shared passwords across multiple machines. If you're in an environment where you image, you have a gold standard, that local account is then used throughout. Like I mentioned earlier, that last bullet was meant to be on the last slide. Oops. So just to keep this talk within the allotted time frame, we really aren't going to talk about stuff like domain cache credentials or token impersonation or services that have configuration files that have plain text passwords or plain text passwords stored in files on file servers or keyloggers or phishing or any of the other ways that are out there for people to gain credentials. Bottom line is, if someone gets onto one of your workstations, there are multiple avenues they can use to get credentials to use on your network. Attackers always take the path of least resistance. Once an attacker has system-level access on a box, it's usually a matter of time, minutes, hours, days at the most, before they have system on your domain controller, and then it's seconds for them to gather everyone's hashes on your domain, and then it's just completely over at that point. So.
All right, so we have a bad problem, but how do we make it worse? Or how does Microsoft make it worse? So two ways that they make it worse is by ensuring that the local admin password on every single machine is the same. And they did this in Server 2008 by introducing this really cool feature, group policy preferences. Has anyone seen GPPs before? Anyone use them? Okay, so they're actually really powerful. They give you granular control of lots of settings, but they do easily enable an admin to set the same password across entire OUs and across entire enterprises. Another way that Microsoft made this worse is with smart cards, which I was part of an organization where Microsoft came in, a consultant came in, and tried to sell us on the security benefits of smart cards. And one of the things that they sold us on was that it would help mitigate the pass-the-hash attack. That was a decade ago, and of course, the Microsoft presenters went over the fact that it actually makes it worse. So let's start with group policy preference settings. So this is what it looks like in Group Policy Management Editor. So we're going to rename the administrator account to Don't Hash Me Bro and set a password. And that's a really easy way to ensure that even if one of your users has local admin rights, they don't go and change the local admin password. So a lot of people find it useful. But what it actually does is makes it really easy for an attacker. By renaming the account to something like MS Presenters and setting that password, we're able to get on one box and then move from that box to any other box with the same password. And that's essentially what pass the hash is in its most common form. But actually, GPP makes it even worse, because the passwords are only obfuscated on the domain controller. And as Skip talked about before, the actual machine account is a domain account and can access the DC. So an Italian researcher released a Python tool to be able to decrypt it, and actually found it's AES encrypted, so it's not technically obfuscated. It is encrypted, but it's encrypted with that 32-byte key that was on TechNet post on the subject. So the tool that he released was in Python, which is cool, but Python's not installed on Windows by default, but PowerShell is. So I rewrote it as a PowerShell function, and released with the talk is get decrypted C password. So if you want to go grab the actual encrypted form, pull it down and decrypt it instantly with PowerShell, you can do that. We're going to quickly demo what this looks like to your enterprise. And we did this from a user standpoint, targeted at admins. Obviously, if you're a pen tester, there are Metasploit modules for you to do this. There are lots of other ways that you could accomplish this. But I want to show you how easy it is for a user to be able to do that. So the scenario is GPP is being enforced. This user who Googled a little bit has figured out that he can get around the actual restrictions on his user account. So he downloads get GPP password, and then he now has local admin. So we're going to start from the login. So the account is normal.user. Logs in, sped up. So he's got this really cool tool that he uses at home that he wants to use here, VNC, which is everyone's favorite remote access tool. So he goes to try to install it, and UAC stops him, which it should. It requires administrative credentials. So he puts in his username and password, because maybe he is an admin, but he doesn't have the rights, so he needs to elevate. So with group policy preferences, he's literally seconds away from being able to accomplish this and many other devious things. And we will show you how easy it is. So he can browse to GitHub and snag get GPP password. This is a script I wrote that's in PowerSploit, which is a really awesome suite of PowerShell functions and scripts and modules written mostly by Matt Graber and a couple other contributors to do offensive post-exploitation on boxes. So the easiest way, even if PowerShell is locked down, the execution policy is in its default setting. See, that PowerShell session is normal user. It does not actually apply to the PowerShell interpreter, this live session that we're in. So we can paste that function in and then just call it. And no matter what the settings are execution policy-wise, this will reach out to the DC from the box, quickly search, find everywhere that those passwords exist, and return the actual plain text usernames and passwords. So as a pen tester, this has been extremely useful over the last year and a half, or year and a half. Probably 9 out of 10 times I'm able to find either old passwords or current ones for local admin rights. So I no longer really worry as much about when sending a phishing email whether or not I'll be able to escalate quickly. Privilege escalation with GPP, because it's so popular in enterprises, has made my job a lot easier. So now I can just log in as a local admin account and install the software that everyone wants on their enterprise, especially if you're security. So the demo is focused at admins. We're going to throw this up on YouTube. So if you want to show, if you're a pen tester and you want to show how bad this is to someone quickly, you can do it in less than 3 minutes. But the reality is, as a pen tester, you'll be able to use this to move around pretty quickly. All right, so we talked about group policy preferences. Who's actually deployed group policy preferences? So there are a couple people. Any pen tester seen it on pen tests and used it? A couple of those as well. All right, smart cards. To be honest with you, I've pen tested many organizations that have smart cards deployed, and originally it was a very scary proposition. It changes the way that you have to look at things. It breaks a lot of tools, but in the end, it actually makes it easier, and I'll explain why. One, smart cards are great in that users don't have to remember passwords. So by checking that account, smart card is required for interactive login right there. We get rid of the requirement for that user to have a password. Unfortunately, authentication on the back end really works essentially the same. What you're looking at down here is Mimikatz from a smart card user who's interactively logged in using their smart card, and we've dumped, that's their password in hex, which it would be terrible to have to try to type that. But it's a lot easier to type the hash because that's even shorter than the password, and it's equivalent in most cases. NT hashes and NTLM v2, none of it changes with the introduction of smart cards. Smart cards actually give an attacker an opportunity to persist a unique way that wasn't present before. With Pass the Hash Firefox, which is what you're looking at on the bottom here, and the fact that NTLM SSP has been pushed out of the perimeter, which is a lot of what we talked about last year, you can now hit an enterprise, dump all the domain hashes, and then come back in hitting SharePoint or OWA using those hashes, even if they have smart card deployed. The beauty of smart cards is that the passwords, the hashes themselves never change. Once the account has been configured, It's not like service accounts that change at a random interval or change at a set interval. Those hashes will remain the same. So in a scenario where, say, an intern shows up at a new company and they're given a smart card, that password hash in the enterprise, no matter how much the enterprise moves on, the hash itself for that actual user, he could become the CEO eventually and have the same password he had when he was an intern. So 10, 15, 20 years later, if something doesn't drastically change, that's really the scenario that you could end up with.
One other thing real quick about smart cards.
Oh, yeah.
You, smart card accounts, while you can do password guesses on them, they do lock out, but as soon as somebody actually logs in successfully with the smart card, they don't even get prompted that their password account was locked out. So because the smart card is considered a stronger form of authentication than the username and password, you essentially have unlimited guesses to those accounts. They will lock out for like NTLM, but then once somebody logs in with a smart card, it's game on again. So also the accounts don't expire. And we have actually been to an organization that is part of their setup of a new account. As soon as you click that checkbox, it scrambles the password. It assigns a random password. They then went and assigned the same password to every account for every smart card user that was on there. So when we dumped the hashes, we ended up with 7,000 identical hashes. And what's worse was we cracked the password. But so we didn't even have to use the pass to hash.
Yeah. And thanks to an information disclosure vulnerability within Windows, even when an account gets locked out, you get a message saying that your account has been locked out when you successfully get the password. So then you sit back and wait till they log in, and then you could come back in. In this case, it's not the password, it's the hash. Realistically, that attack's probably never going to happen, trying to guess an NT hash. But
But if they do set the a password afterwards.
Right, exactly. That second scenario I've actually seen twice, and I actually saw documentation of a third organization during a pen test, got on, saw the documentation, and was able to tell them, don't do this. They had a plan to do it in the future, where they would set the same password for all accounts at regular intervals. Okay, so in the talk yesterday and in Microsoft's white paper, they gave 3 main mitigations. I'm sorry to pick on you guys. And they're really good mitigations. Restrict and protect high privileged domain accounts. Restrict and protect local accounts with admin privileges. And restrict inbound traffic using Windows Firewall. Now, the third one, I'd love for you, if you're a Windows admin, to take the white paper and go to your network admin and tell them that you're going to deploy 10,000 non-centrally managed firewalls on the network and record and put it on YouTube, because I'm sure that's going to be fun. So what it boils down to for us when we read it was, stay calm, pass the hash. It's bad, but it's not that bad, and eat your vegetables. So ours might be actually worse. Our mitigation is don't get owned. So if you don't get owned, if an attacker is not able to quickly get to system and dump those hashes, they can't be used. So restrict admin privileges, which is tough to do. I know. I was a Windows admin. But you've got to do it. The point is you want to slow an attacker. Once they've got on, they're going to get on. Phishing is going to work. Your users are going to click on something. There's always a new method that they're going to use. So you need to slow them to the point where you're able to detect that they're there and get them off before they get to domain admin. So one of the ways that it would be very painful, I've never seen it, but it would be very painful if someone set NTFS file permissions on PowerShell.exe. That would be very upsetting to me as a pen tester. I've seen it on command.exe and net.exe, and a lot of that stuff is in the NSA STIG or whatever they're called, guidance for hardening Windows boxes. I don't think they've added PowerShell, but that would really slow me down, and it would probably slow other people down as well. And you do want to patch all local privilege escalation bugs. Both Skip and I have seen where organizations just focus on high and they don't worry about client-side attacks, and they think client-side is associated with email. A lot of times client-side attacks are also used as a part of privilege escalation to quickly get up. You might have user on a box. If you're able to exploit something that's running as a system service, you definitely want to look at all advisories and think about how it could be used against you, and then patch them. Biggest thing is you don't want to make it easy for them either. Use UAC. It's a pain in the butt, and it's to use, and it's really not that big of a deal for an attacker to get around it. But I don't know if you know, the most common way that attackers get around UAC requires dropping a binary, which is something for a lot of pen testers and attackers. We don't want to drop a binary on the disk. We want to avoid that completely. So to use like the Metasploit bypass UAC module, it's actually dropping DLL to disk. So that's good. We're forcing them to do something that gives you the opportunity to detect it. GPP is awesome for a lot of other granular changes on machines to enforce that, but don't use it to set passwords. If you can get away with disabling the 500 account, I don't see why you can't, but do it, get rid of it entirely. Obviously, don't use credentials in startup scripts or any scripts that are stored on the DC. You're going to have admins do silly things like this, so occasionally check for it. And don't save service account passwords on workstations, including admin workstations in text files. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is protect the crown jewels. And the crown jewels are being protected by your DC. Your DC might be the crown jewels for a pen tester, but your crown jewels as an organization is your data. If they're able to get on your DC, they can pivot from your DC and the credentials there to get to anything. If you've got your enterprise virtualized, you need to protect your backups and your virtual machines with the same amount of effort as you put into the DCs. A lot of really strong organizations spend a lot of time on the DC itself and then leave backup sitting on $100 Best Buy purchased network attached storage devices.
Which we have seen.
And I've absolutely seen that more than once.
And I've downloaded the hard drive files for a DC before and then mounted it in my copy of VMware and then just went to town. So it's nice to have a backup copy of the DC to play with.
All right. Yep. It's fun to rejoin that to the enterprise and just maintain it outside of their network for a while. What is all this crazy replication traffic? All right, so everyone has too many enterprise admins, domain admins. All right, who's got 50 domain admins or more? Who's got 25 domain admins?
Who's lying?
Yeah, there's so many liars in here. Who's got one domain admin on their enterprise?
Who doesn't know how many domain admins
exactly.
you have?
How many people are in the local administrators group for the domain controller? Because those are all domain admin equivalent accounts. So it's lots of fun to check that out where you have like nested help desk accounts there where those guys are all domain admins. So why do people end up with domain admin? Why do service accounts? Why does that happen? Because it's the easiest way to solve a problem. Just give them the privileges and let it go. And that makes it really easy for an attacker to move around. So you really can't be lazy. I didn't want to expose that I've done this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I used to be in the military for almost 12 years. And in that time, I was told a lot of what I would do each day. And as a Windows admin, a lot of times I would have a major tell me, you will, Sergeant, you will add these people to the domain admins group. And I never, ever wanted to do that because I knew that they didn't belong there. So what I decided to do is follow his orders explicitly, which were add them to the domain administrators group. So I created a domain administrators group. And then I added them to that. And then I took it one step forward, and I actually went in and explicitly denied them privileges to do things like move an OU or create accounts, delete accounts. So I had a whole group of restrictions, but that can bite you in the butt in a couple ways. One, if you leave the organization, so I left, and then you come back, and then you actually need domain admin rights, and they stick you in the domain administrators group. Yep, so that happened. The other thing that could happen is that someone could think they're being smart and nest the actual domain admins group into the restricted, deny privileged domain administrators group, in which case no one can do anything and the entire enterprise has to be rebuilt. So don't do that. All right, so this is basically eat your vegetable type advice. Issue multiple accounts to admins. I really, one of my biggest pet peeves, and I'm sure a lot of people in here agree, is if you're browsing the internet with IE as a domain admin, you A, shouldn't have domain admin privileges. Who said that?
Should be fired.
I might agree with that, but I was asked not to say that. So that's pretty common advice. Managing tokens, I went against an organization that was really good at this. Microsoft has some steps, ways that they're going to implement restricting tokens and their usefulness in future versions of Windows. So after you go through upgrading from XP to Windows 7, and then eventually, whenever 8-9 years from now, you move to the next version of Windows, that'll be taken care of. Until then, you might want to pay attention to token management. Accounts create tokens, elevated accounts create tokens on boxes. Most of the time I see this in vulnerability scanners, or we see this in vulnerability scanners. They use, McAfee was a recent example, they use a vulnerability scanner to scan their enterprise with a domain admin credential or an elevated credential. That token's created on every single box because of the way it's authenticating. You get onto one box through a pen test, you use GPP or however you get to system on that box, and bam, you have a DA token, and your attack lasted 45 seconds for you to own an enterprise. Pay attention to how you log out of RDP. Actually log out, don't just close it, because that'll leave an actual token in. And one of the hardest organizations I've ever pen tested, every admin, anytime they use credentials, they went and asked before they did it, which seems insane, but it worked for them. When they did it, they immediately logged out, regardless of what the server was. That included domain controllers, which still seems insane to me, but they kept their tokens to a minimum, and it took weeks to find a token that was useful, and it took weeks to actually escalate privileges on that network. All right, so we still got time. So we've just talked at you for over 35 minutes. So we're not going to leave you hanging. We can give you some scripts that, if pen testers, you can point organizations in the right direction. Most of these out of the box aren't hugely useful, but this one is. What this one's going to do, first off, this is PowerShell. Who's used PowerShell before? Awesome. If you haven't used PowerShell, you should. There are lots of great books, lots of documentation out there. It's immensely useful for pen testers as well as Windows admins, obviously Windows admins, and forensic people. In this case, this is how easy it is to reset every password hash. So we can prevent that persistence problem where the hashes stay the same. And it's got some drawbacks, and Microsoft said that this doesn't scale. You be the judge. I think it's an effective way to mitigate the risk of the persistence problem with smart cards. We're just going to import the Active Directory module there, create an array of users that actually have that account, have that setting set. Pretty simple. So now 80 users has all the accounts that have that setting. And then we're going to go through and do a easy for each, a for loop through, and toggle the setting, wait a second, toggle it back. That's going to randomly generate a new password for that user. It is going to kill all their live sessions, any active sessions they have at that point. But if you schedule this maybe every 90 days, you can certainly mitigate the risk of that. I know for a fact that a couple of sites that I've pen tested are actively doing this. One got a little over eager and was like setting it to run every day, every other day. I wouldn't recommend that. They had lots of replication issues after that. Another way to mitigate the local admin, the traditional pass the hash, which I like to think of like pass the hash Firefox, where you've dumped all the domain hashes, as kind of a different attack, because you have all the hashes this way. most people think of pass the hash as a lateral privilege escalation across a network. So to kind of slow that down, we released, and all this stuff is online on the Black Hat site since they didn't send out CDs this year. Set unique password is kind of a start. I wouldn't want every organization to start using this, because if everyone's using the same principle, eventually people will figure out a way around it and move on. But this is just an idea with different ways that I wrote. Skip requested that we generate random passwords, which is cool. And a lot of random password generators, they generate passwords of a static length. So if you're actually doing password cracking, which is a hobby of both of ours, knowing the static length of all passwords makes it actually easier to crack. So this sets random variable lengths of those random, pseudo-random passwords. It's not actually random. There's a built-in method within PowerShell to do that. I wouldn't recommend example 1 as well, unless you have to, because we're outing all the plain text passwords to a spreadsheet. That would be dangerous if left available to someone. And different use cases for it, you can read from a file, pipe it in, it'll go through and set all those passwords. Then this was, and I took this from 2 different clients that were doing this. I didn't come up with any of these ideas. But basically they took a passphrase, and they appended it to something that was unique to each machine. So they had all Dell computers, so there was an actual serial number within the BIOS settings in the registry. So they actually pulled out the serial number, and then they appended it to the phrase. So then it was like, it's not multi-factor authentication at all, but it just set a unique password on every single box. So the code to do all that is in this function. You can prepend, append. You can look at it. There are other ways to do unique characteristics, MAC addresses, host names, IP addresses. I would tend to stay away from those because an attacker could get them off the network and eventually script out being able to move around laterally that way. But that's out there, which may be helpful for some of your clients if you're a pen tester or your organization. But detection of pass the hash is actually really easy. There's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way. So let's go over the wrong way, which I've seen. You could write tools to detect. You could write signatures for every pass the hash tool that's out there. The pass the hash tools that Skip and I use are not the same as what's out there. And I think anyone who's a pen tester probably has unique variations of the tools, so the signatures aren't going to match. So I wrote 3 examples of stuff that I've seen written in network signatures before, and those are find psexec service, find the Metasploit psexec service, and find winexec. And this is what it looks like. It gives you the host name that it came from, the username that was used, and when it was actually used. And what this is doing is going through the actual local logs, the event log, and pulling out signatures from the event log that this was happening. So this is detection. It's not prevention. So here's what it looks like. For one of them, this is find MSF psexec service. So we're finding the event ID, which is the modern event ID. They changed them up in, I think, Windows 7, 2008. So it's got a pretty interesting signature that Rob Fuller changed. He added an option within the Metasploit module so that you can change the service name. But the service always starts with M, and it's always that length of an EXE. So probably, you could have some false positives with this signature. It's not the greatest signature in the world. But that's pretty likely to be a psexec service start. So that's what that is. And that's full of fail for multiple reasons. A, like Rob changed the module, you can set the service name to be whatever you want. So that's not going to detect it. And if you think that this is actually detecting every pass the hash or every account use, you're really going to be lulled into a false sense of security. So instead, let's monitor for the actual activity itself. And if you walked around the vendor booth area, there are actually several products that are doing similar things that can all be accomplished with relatively simple PowerShell scripts. So what we're looking for specifically is NTLM network logins. So this little function, which that's all it is right there, is going to use an XPath filter, which I did a lot of testing, and this is looking for the older ID or No, that's the modern one. No, that's the older one, which still works. XPath filters for the get when event Windows commandlet. The documentation's not really out there. You see, it's kind of the query is kind of weird looking, so I had to play with that to get it just right. But it's actually near instant. So you could have gigs. So I generated an event log that was actually 15 gigs. Just I subscribed to all the machines, dropped it into one, and created this huge event log. And I really wanted to put myself in an admin shoes. Like, can I actually use this? Not just throw together something that works on my one demo box. And a lot of the documentation that's out there, like in the PowerShell cookbook, is great, but it really wasn't as fast as I wanted it to be. So I settled on the XPath filter there. And that actually in multiple gig event logs returns near instantly, which is great. It's a lot faster than a lot of people recommend for looping through each event looking for this stuff, which takes hours, especially if you're trying to push this out over the network. So I think that's pretty useful, and I've been pushing that out to my clients, and they've been happy. So now we can find past the hash, and additionally, we pick up insider threats where accounts have been used, elevated accounts have been used, maybe outside. So one of the things that you can do, because this is returning objects, you can play with them. And this is a pretty good string to use. We want to get rid of anonymous login is going to show up all over the place, so get rid of that. Anybody know what that is? That host name? Or that one? That's the randomly generated host name used by the Metasploit PSExec module. So that's bad. So what you can do with this is you can pipe it with send mail message, which is a PowerShell commandlet that easily lets you send emails. And you can schedule this as a task. In one case, one of my customers was able to set this up to pretty good success. Where they have it running daily, you might want it more regular than that. And they have it emailing out, checking, running through the log, looking for elevated use, and then they audit just these elevated use. So this is elevated use over NTLM, which is most commonly going to be an attacker. And that brings us to the question slide. The surveys, if you scan your badge on the way out, that would be great. The feedback we got from last year was immensely helpful. So we would definitely appreciate that. We'd like to thank all the Accuvent Labs guys, Martin, Eric, Tom. I'd like to thank my boss, JP, for helping me get out here. And Matt Graber, Lee Holmes, who I was hoping would be here, and then Carlos Perez, and all the other PowerShell ninjas that helped me come up with those functions and make them better. And Princess, where are you? Yeah, you're here. Anyone have any questions? Yeah. Sure. There's a mic behind you if you can. Thank you.
Great talk, thanks. I was curious if in a large architecture, the value of read-only domain controllers in any of this as a mitigation approach.
Read-only domain controllers are especially, I think they're mostly useful in physical security scenarios where as a full scope pen tester, I've been able to gain access to facilities that were less secure than other facilities and gain physical access to a domain controller. For it to be a read-only domain controller, that only gives you access to the credentials of the users that are there, which is a really good step. So I think that's very important when you're looking at physical security. But as far as past the hash, read-only domain controllers don't ensure that they don't enforce authentication from users that are there in that site. A user can explicitly authenticate against the DC itself. So it really doesn't stop or slow down. It might trip up a novice attacker that's not familiar with modern, and a lot of training doesn't include that. So if they've gone through, basic, I don't want to say that. So basic training that teaches pen testers probably how not to be a pen tester or how to be a pen tester 10 years ago, then they're probably going to run into that and not know what to do. But anyone that knows what they're doing is just going to realize it's a read-only domain controller. Good on you for having that, and then actually ask for the PDC emulator, go straight at the heart of the enterprise and move on. Are there any other questions? We're going to be, Skip and I are both going to head over to the AccuVent booth, and we're going to be over there hanging out, answering questions. So if you didn't want to ask it in a public setting, we'll be there. Thanks for coming, and enjoy Black Hat.